Hello and good afternoon. I would like to welcome everyone to this Thursday afternoon and to today's webinar, Canada as an H-1B Alternative in 2020. Today's session will be approximately 45 minutes long, and that includes an audience Q&A session at the end of the main presentation. As such, we encourage you to ask some questions throughout the presentation today. If you'd like to do so, you can please type that question in via the GoToWebinar question box that you should see on your screen, and we'll try to get to your question at the end of the main presentation. Please keep in mind, however, that we can only answer general questions. We cannot get into any specific case-type questions, so please consult with professionals on that one. Also, this webinar is being recorded, and we will send you a link to download the recording after today's live session. You will also receive a link to download the slide deck, as well as SHRM and HRCI continuing education credits. All of these materials will arrive in your email inboxes tomorrow afternoon, so please keep an eye out for that. And if you don't receive it for whatever reason, please let us know, and we'll be sure to send it to you. So just some introductions to start things off. For those that are unfamiliar with Envoy, for nearly 20 years, Envoy has been on a mission to fix the inefficient, frustrating, and confusing immigration process. Envoy combines expert legal representation with innovative technology to deliver the only platform that makes it seamless for companies to hire, mobilize, and manage a global workforce. Envoy secures work authorization in over 100 countries, has grown 33% year over year, and works with over 1,000 customers. We're particularly proud of our NPS score, which is a testament to the employee experience that we provide. Also joining us today is Mob Squad. Mob Squad is an innovative company that helps U.S. companies retain their top-tier foreign talent when they do not have an immigration path in the U.S. For example, if an employee isn't selected in the H-1B cap. Mob Squad has a unique partnership with the Canadian government that allows them to get software engineers and their spouses visas and have them relocated and working in as little as just 4 weeks. Mob Squad will outline more about their model and approach later in this presentation. And so then joining us for the presentation today, first from Envoy is Jim Yang, a senior global mobility specialist and Canadian immigration consultant. Jim has over 6 years of corporate immigration experience across several industries, including oil and gas, technology, transportation, and many more. Jim is able to provide comprehensive policy consulting, case strategy, and compliance advice for Canadian immigration, and has project experience with immigration process optimization. Jim, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Eric.
So a little worried there. Also joining us is Irfan Raji, the CEO and founder of Mob Squad. Irfan is also a venture partner at Relay Ventures, an adjunct professor at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, and he's a senior advisor to the Canadian government. Irfan, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Eric. Happy to be here.
Awesome. So before I turn things over to you two, I just want to quickly pull up this slide right here, just to remind our audience that the content is not intended as legal advice. So I'm going to leave this up for a few more seconds. And then I'm going to turn things over to you, Irfan, just to kind of get this discussion rolling on Canada and global immigration. We're having this webinar in January, and as you mentioned, your company helps those other companies whose employees may not be selected in the H-1B cap, which, as we all know, is coming up, some major changes in the H-1B cap. So, Irfan, what can you tell us more about Canada and global immigration?
Great. Well, thank you, Eric, for the opportunity, and thank all of you for making time to join us today. I hope that today's session is helpful and insightful. And as part of that, I will reiterate, if you do have questions as we're going through some of this material, please don't hesitate to ask. We do want to make sure the session adds as much value for you as possible. Eric, I thought that we would start today perhaps with actually a couple case studies just to make this a bit more real in terms of actual individuals who have moved to Canada.
For sure, yeah. Let me pull up the first one.
Sure. So this is a gentleman named Juan. Juan, this might be familiar to some of you, that especially those that work in migration and in HR. Juan is a Chinese national. He studied at the University of Pennsylvania. Like many software engineers, he got a STEM OPT and then applied for the H-1B cap a couple times in a row and was unsuccessful. So his OPT was expiring. His choices at that time were to go back to China, where his employer at the time, Pedal Card, which is based in New York, that's where he was working. The choice was either he could go back to China, but they really couldn't work with him in that environment, not just because of the time zone issues and proximity issues, but also there's IP or intellectual property considerations with having software engineers working in places like China or India or Russia. And so his choice was to leave and take his young family, he had a young toddler and his wife back to China and then try to reestablish his life there. Or, Pedal called us actually, and if you flip to the next slide, we worked with Juan and Pedal Card, and we had him working in Canada in about 4 weeks. We got him a work permit, work visa, his spouse a work visa, and we relocated his family. And I think that was a situation where Pedal is ecstatic because they get to keep this employee that they'd worked with for 3 years. They really understood, they really liked. Juan got to keep his same job, live a similar quality of life, and he's now on the path actually to getting a Canadian citizenship for him and his family. They'll have that probably here in the next 3 years. If you look at sort of the what we heard both from Pedal Card, our client, as well as Juan, a real success story. He moved to another country, he was there within the month. He's going to be a Canadian citizen, and he has an opportunity to keep sort of his North American dream alive. Sue, our client at Pedal, the chief people officer there, was really happy with this arrangement. We solved the problem they obviously had for their engineering team, and created an opportunity for them to have a culture where at Pedal it's clear that if you're somebody that's important to the company, they're going to make sure they find ways to make sure that even with work visa challenges in the U.S. that you're able to continue with them. If you flip the slide, Eric, to the next one, we'll give you another example. This is Andre. Andre was also working in New York, actually, for a company called Betterment. Some of you may be familiar with H-1B renewals and the dramatic increase in requests for evidence. And so this was a challenge that Andre had. He's a Portuguese national, and he was really having a hard time renewing his H-1B. He got to the limit and really needed to get out of the U.S. and wanted to keep his job, and Betterment really wanted him to stay. And so they contacted us, and actually, Andre, because of his nationality, we actually moved to Canada in, I think, 2 or 3 days and had him working again back for Betterment within 3 weeks. If you flip to the next slide, and Eric, you'll see a little bit about Andre's experience. It is an end-to-end service. So we helped move him to Canada. We helped him find a home. We helped him with immigration. We picked him up at the airport. We helped him with his moving logistics. We got him a private bank account. Really made everything sort of work for him. There's a picture of him actually in our Calgary office there next to him at his current work location. We put his logo up on the wall, which is kind of cool. And the permit, like I said earlier, leads to permanent residency in 6 months and citizenship in about 3.5 years. So for him, instead of trying to fight through that RFC and go through another H-1B cycle, but then probably have to do another cycle, he's spending those 3 years instead in Canada and will be a citizen here. These two stories, I think, highlight a little bit about what Mob Squad does for U.S. companies that are trying to navigate where they find challenges with the work visa process, which all of you are probably looking at right now with the cap coming up. And it really is, it's able to be solved, and these opportunities exist really because of the Canadian immigration system, which is dramatically different than the U.S. immigration system in terms of how they come to specifically technology talent. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes just talking about the background of Canadian immigration and what the policies are here, just so everyone has an understanding of why what seems magical can actually happen in Canada, which is quite different often in the U.S.
Yeah, Irfan, if I can hop in real quick. I mean, these are very interesting stories. So I'm wondering if, as we move along, if you can kind of discuss the Canadian immigration, the numbers that you're seeing, because it does seem like a lot. They're trying to attract more immigrants. especially very lately, and they want to hit a certain goal, I believe, in this new decade.
Yeah, that's right. So the policy framework in Canada is different. So this slide is showing a little bit about immigrants that are coming to Canada over time. So it's been growing for the last 20, 30, 40 years, actually. And it's a steady upward climb. And really what the target is in Canada right now is 1% of the population per year they want to bring in as immigrants. And so for us, that's about 350,000 people as a target for 2020. And if you go to the next slide, the makeup of this group is also very different than typically what you see in the U.S. And so you'll see that economic migrants, these are people that have a job or are employable, people that can come in as skilled workers are, usually about half of the immigrants we bring into the country. Then, like in the United States, we have family sponsorship, some refugees that also come in as well. And so you're seeing that this is a system that is way towards a certain target in terms of number. If you looked at the U.S. numbers, there's about 1 million people that get a green card every year. For us, about 350,000 that get Canadian permanent residency every year. So for our size of country, which is 1/10 the size of the U.S., we really are punching above our weight in terms of immigrants. And then if you look at what types of immigrants, really it's knowledge workers. And what's interesting is that people often think that this is a policy of one government or one stripe of government. In Canada, we have conservatives and liberals. That's the equivalent of the U.S. would be like the Republicans and the Democrats. At least I'm a Canadian, but at least my read of it is that the Republicans and Democrats do come at this issue differently. In Canada, the left party and the right party, the liberals and the conservatives, in terms of their political stripe, actually both are pro-immigrant and pro-knowledge immigrants. The real debate in Canada isn't if we're going to have immigration and have 1% immigration. It's actually, the quantum. Should we have 1% or more than 1% is really the debate right now. And then should we have, half of them be economic migrants or more than half? And so as a business, especially a business that needs technology workers or knowledge workers, all of the political parties in the country are very pro immigration, which is why, having technology talent here is a lot easier. If you flip to the next slide, it's actually for a logical reason. And as you read the headlines in Canada, it's because every political party recognizes that having knowledge workers actually helps drive economic growth and economic diversification. We all know from economics 101 that gross domestic product or economic productivity of a country is really just capital plus labor. And so each political party has decided that by having more high quality labor, they can actually drive the economy, therefore drive the tax base, and by that be able to pay for the generous social programs that we have in the country. I'll pass maybe the presentation over, Jim, to you to talk a little bit more about the different categories of immigration, because you're really the expert in that space.
Thank you, Irfan. Moving on to the next slide, let's look at the different methods people can get into Canada. Now, there are essentially 4 common pathways in which we see people entering the country. The first is a popular method in which many employers use to start getting someone into Canada to work, and this is called the Temporary Foreign Workers Program. It is used by employers in all fields of work, ranging from technology, agriculture, professional services, manufacturing, and many other industries as well. The basis of this program is really to say to the government that there are no qualified or willing Canadians available for this labor shortage we're experiencing in our Canadian economy, and thus we need this individual from a different country to fill the role. Now, work permits under the Temporary Foreign Workers Program can be issued for up to 2 years, and due to recent immigration changes, this pathway has really benefited many companies, such as Mob Squad, in retaining foreign workers faster and made the immigration process more predictable. Now, economic migrants include people inside or outside of Canada who are applying for permanent residency status that can contribute to the country's economic benefit or talent pool. This is equivalent to the U.S. green card, and people are chosen on a merit-based system versus a lottery process. What this means is that a person can be selected to obtain residency status based upon elements such as their age, education, work experience, adaptability, and language abilities, and if a Canadian employer has offered them a job. The third method is through family sponsorship, where one obtains permanent residency status in Canada through being a direct relative, such as a spouse, common law, child, or parent of a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. And lastly, refugees that are seeking protection from Canada. Eric, if we can move on to the next slide. Now, diving into a deeper look at the Temporary Foreign Workers Program, this is essentially one of the two most used methods in which companies can retain foreign talent in Canada, and it is often referred to as the LMIA process, or in long known as the Labor Market Impact Assessment category. When making an LMIA application, what a company is really doing is telling the Canadian government that, hey, we've conducted a labor market test and there are no qualified Canadians or PRs that are available to fill this role. And as a result, we're requesting permission to hire this foreign talent that we have assessed. So how does a Canadian company conduct a labor market test and request for a work permit under the Temporary Foreign Workers Program? On a high level, there are essentially 3 steps within this process. First, the Canadian company must post the role on different job platforms to advertise the position, and the ads must be active for a minimum period of 4 consecutive weeks, along with adhering to a set of criteria. After the job posting, a package consisting of recruitment efforts made, along with the company's information and the job description details, will need to be submitted to the government for review. For example, a piece of recruitment information that is always good to include is an Excel sheet or chart that lists all the candidates that applied for the job and were called or interviewed for the role but did not qualify. This evidences the effort made to recruit Canadians and demonstrates why the foreign talent is needed for the role due to his or her qualifications. The review step with the government typically takes about 2 to 4 months' time, and upon receiving a positive opinion or approval on the LMIA, the company can then apply for the work permit on the basis of the positive opinion. Generally speaking, this process takes approximately 4 to 7 months' time to complete from job posting to getting the actual work permit. Moving on to the next slide. Now, looking at a pathway to permanent residency for skilled workers overseas or in Canada that is often used is the express entry system. The express entry process was designed to replace a first-come, first-served model of accepting economic PR application, and its purpose is really to facilitate a faster PR process for skilled workers who are more likely to succeed in Canada economically based on a merit or point-based system. Now, how does express entry work? The first step is to determine if one meets the criteria at least one of the federal economic immigration programs in Canada, and there are 3. Upon confirming that a person upon confirmation that they qualify under one of the 3 federal economic immigration programs, a person would express their interest into coming into Canada as a skilled worker by creating what's called a express entry profile, which consists of information about their skills, work experience, language abilities, education, and other details. After the individual submits their profile within the express entry system, they would get a score to determine their place in a pool of applicants through a comprehensive ranking classification. And the government will regularly invite top-ranking candidates from the pool to apply for permanent residency. I often like to explain to my clients that the express entry system is very similar to the process of applying for a job in LinkedIn, for example. As a job seeker, you would first, find a job posting that would interest you in which you meet the qualifications for. Upon confirming that you kind of have the skills needed for the role, you would email the recruiter your resume, and the HR division of that company would compare how competitive you are versus the other candidates that have applied. And if you meet all the criteria of the job and is more skilled than the other candidates, you would receive a call to interview for the role. Like applying for a job and where you submit your resume, submitting your express entry profile does not mean you will receive an invitation to apply. And it is not the same as submitting your application for permanent residency, which is often confused. It is after you have submitted your express entry profile and have received an invitation to apply from the government, at which point you're making the actual application for permanent residency. With respect to the timeline of this process, it can take upwards of 14 months to complete. Moving on to the next slide. So here we will look at an overview without going too deep at the actual point system of express entry and what elements or factors the government is looking at when it comes to the score allocation. So let's just say we have an individual that qualifies under the Federal Skilled Workers Program, which is one of the 3 economic immigration streams for Canadian permanent residents. Now, we have to look at what score he will receive depending on his background information and determine if he will be competitive in the express entry pool and what is the likelihood he would receive an invitation to apply. As you can see in the chart, age is one of those elements that Canada puts quite a heavy value on when it comes to economic growth, along with the level of education. Now, education is evaluated on the basis of its equivalency to a Canadian degree. So for example, let's say we have a person that has a 4 years US bachelor's degree, and upon having it professionally assessed, it equates to a Canadian bachelor's degree. Based on the chart, he would receive 120 points. But now let's say a foreign national has a 1 year's master's degree, and upon having his degree assessed, it only equates to a Canadian bachelor's. In that instance, he would not receive the 135 points, since his degree does not equate to a Canadian master's and would only receive the 120 points for having an equivalency to a Canadian bachelor's. Up next, we have individuals' English or French language proficiency. And of course, the higher you score on your language test in the categories of reading, writing, speaking, and listening, the higher your express entry score will be. And finally, professional work experience outside of Canada is also valued and given a score depending on the duration of employment. Now, where it might make a significant difference for a lot of individuals in meeting kind of the cutoff score and is having Canadian work experience or a valid job offer in Canada. Having the combination of both Canadian and foreign experience will most definitely help in achieving a higher score. And with the addition of a valid job offer in Canada, this would put you kind of in a competitive edge. Currently, the cutoff to receive an invitation to apply for permanent residence is at 473 points. This number does fluctuate since the government issues out invitations to apply on a monthly basis. However, it calmly tends to hover around the 460 to kind of 480 mark most of the time. Moving on to the next slide. So there has been 2 new major enhancements to the Canadian immigration system in the past few years. The first is the creation of now the permanent program of Global Talent Stream, which we'll talk more about in a few minutes here, along with the system of express entry, as discussed in our previous slide. The Global Talent Stream was a program that was introduced in 2017 by the government as Canada's innovation agenda. And this is essentially to help businesses attract the talents they need to succeed in the global marketplace. It is a stream under the Temporary Foreign Workers Program, and it is also a fast-track method that enables 2-week processing time for labor market applications. When it comes to coming up with the Global Talent Stream, the government really tailored this to Canadian businesses looking to hire specific occupations and looking at how to expedite the immigration process for in-demand jobs, such as software engineers, IT analysts, and application developers. Moving on to the next slide. So how does the global talent stream apply, and what are we talking about here in actual practice? Now, if this is our regular labor market test process in hiring a foreign worker, where the steps are first to advertise the job and then submit an application to the government to say that there are no available Canadians available for the position. One beneficial factor of the global talent stream is the dropping of the recruitment requirement, which is extremely attractive for many companies because it saves time, money, and effort, especially if you have a suitable foreign candidate that's already that you already have in mind. Moving on to the next slide. So as many of you know, the search for a suitable candidate and navigating the immigration process is already difficult enough. And thus the government, through the global talent stream, is saying, look, we understand that Canadian companies are already doing quite a bit to recruit for jobs in which our country is experiencing a labor shortage of. So let's not dictate how the employers need to advertise for the roles and the way that it is done. Now, do keep in mind that while recruitment efforts are not a requirement, a company needs to demonstrate to the government under the global talent stream, there is a question in the application that asks still whether or not the position has been advertised. However, in most, if not all of the applications that I've assisted with, the answer from companies are still a big resounding yes, because companies still need to post the jobs in order to have applicants apply for them, but it might not be specific to kind of how the Canadian government wants it to be done. Moving on to the next slide. So while employers do not need to adhere to the LMIA recruitment requirement under the global talent stream, the catch is that the companies are required to work with the government to create and develop a robust strategy known as the Labor Market Benefits Plan. Now, this plan essentially needs to showcase the company's commitment to activities that will have a positive impact on the Canadian labor market by explaining how the company will create jobs and or increase skills for Canadians. A good thing to note about this is that the government will genuinely work hand in hand with companies in developing a detailed, but at the same time, a realistic 2-year action plan, as many companies do not have concrete ideas of what kind of commitments they can make. From my personal experience in participating with the employers and Service Canada to come up with the labor market benefits plan, I would say that I was truly impressed by the level of understanding the officers have for businesses and the willingness to work with employers to come up with commitments that are achievable instead of forcing companies to kind of partake in certain activities. Some common and measurable commitments that I've seen proposed are, for example, providing paid co-op or intern opportunities for Canadians, establishing educational partnerships with local or regional institutions, or developing and kind of improving HR models as they relate to attracting and retaining Canadian workers. So a lot of companies actually might already be doing this. So, when it comes to developing this labor market benefits plan, it's kind of already part of what they're doing internally in their company. Now, if I can direct you to the attention to the timelines under the global talent stream, the removal of the advertising criteria eliminates 4 weeks from the overall timeline within the regular labor market test process and expedites the adjudication of the LMIA application from 4 months or more to 2 weeks. Because within Service Canada, there's actually a dedicated service channel created specifically for dealing with global talent stream, for applications under the global talent stream. Moving on to the next slide. So as part of the Canada's innovation agenda, the Canadian government has also established a 2-week work permit processing time policy for eligible high-skilled workers. And as a result, the work permit under the global talent stream method can be a work permit under the global talent stream method can be obtained as fast as in 4 weeks' time, not including kind of the time it takes for biometrics collection and visa stamping. Moving on to the next slide. Now, going back to the express entry system for applying for Canadian permanent residency status, we often see that having an LMIA under the global talent stream can translate to what is known as a valid job offer for the PR process as defined by the immigration regulations. And what this means is that a foreign national will receive a higher score for express entry, which will result in a better chance of receiving an invitation to apply. If we can move on to the next slide. So with the inclusion of a valid job offer, an applicant's merit is boosted, and under the improved express entry system, an applicant is able to get PR status now within 7 to 8 months' time. I will now actually pass the mic back to Irfan to talk more about the other benefits and reasons as to why companies are becoming more and more attracted to coming into Canada.
Great. Thank you, Jim, for walking us through all of that. If we go to the next slide, one of the things that that is a benefit of coming to Canada, obviously, is the ability to get these work permits issued, especially for knowledge workers, in reasonably short order with high confidence. But there are other benefits. And so, if you have a office location in Canada, you're able to attract talent from around the world. So if you're thinking about building up your team, the fact that this global talent stream program exists allows you to access the rest of the world. The second is it's very proximate. The closest thing to being in the U.S. is actually being in Canada. For most of our Canadian employees that are partnered with these U.S. clients of ours, they're within about a 2 to 2.5 hour flight of their home office. And so if you think about a company in New York, having employees in our Halifax office is actually a shorter flight and more proximate than having employees in Chicago. The third thing, and really critical, is actually intellectual property control. The Canadian laws, both from a regulatory perspective and a case law perspective, protect intellectual property as it relates to goodwill and things like software and code to the equivalent standard of the U.S. And so, oftentimes technology scale-ups are not interested in locating in Russia or China or Brazil or India for specifically this reason. Ownership of intellectual property is critical. The fourth is that the benefit, the employee value proposition is really, really strong, in that not only do you get to have a really high quality of life, be in North America, but you also become a Canadian citizen in under 4 years. And right now in the U.S., to get a green card, as I think we all know, it takes oftentimes much longer. And depending on your nationality of origin, like India or China, it can take 20 years or longer. The fifth thing is part of getting this work permit, via the Global Talent Stream program, you can also get a spousal work permit that's attached and guaranteed. And so that allows there to be an opportunity for a family to move quite easily. And the sixth is the cost of living in most Canadian markets is substantially lower than most large U.S. markets. And so we find that our employees have a very, very high quality of life in this country. So the overall proposition of being in Canada is pretty strong. If you look at the next slide, it's not surprising, therefore, that many large American companies have started Canadian subsidiaries. So Amazon, Facebook, Google, Uber, Microsoft, Instacart, and many of these subsidiaries have thousands of employees that have been hired, either local Canadians, but in often cases, these are individuals that had a work visa issue in the U.S. that they've now relocated to Canada to make sure they stay in the team, or international talent that they've brought to Canada because it's substantially easier to bring them into Canada than in the U.S. The challenge of this, if you go to the next slide, is smaller companies, if you only want to move 5 or 10 or 20 people, the fixed costs of coming to Canada are pretty substantial. So if you come for 1,000 people, you probably set up your own subsidiary. If you want to move 5 or 10 or 20, The fixed costs of just having a cross-border structure, having a tax structure, a legal structure, managing government remittances, finding a healthcare plan for 5 people is very difficult because insurers don't want to insure small groups to avoid sort of, having asymmetric risk issues with healthcare. Finding an office space to work, having meetings and dealing with ongoing administration and finances, all of these things, having an office manager, all of these things add up to creating a fixed cost that makes coming to Canada pretty large. Easy to deal with if you bring 100, 200, 500,000 people, but pretty difficult to overcome for 5 or 10. And most importantly, you'll recall when Jim said if you use the Global Talent Stream program to get these individuals into Canada, you have to make commitments to the Canadian government when those permits are issued to hire local Canadians, to do internship programs, to do local market training at the universities, to have a bunch of presence in Canada that's greater than just moving 5 employees over the border. And so doing that and coordinating that, especially if you're a scale up and you got lots of other things that are on the go and lots of other, challenges and other issues to manage, it just makes the administrative hassle difficult. So that's where we came up with the idea for Mob Squad. And if you hit the next slide, as Eric mentioned earlier, I'm actually a partner in a venture capital firm based in Menlo Park. And we created this model because our scale ups were having this challenge and we needed a solution for our own companies. And so we put together a model. We eat our own cooking here. This is something we use for our own portfolio of relay companies, Relay Ventures, where I'm a partner. And we think it's a program because it works for us. It can probably work for others. And so the model is one where we have a contract with our U.S. client. We bring the individual into Canada, whether they're in the U.S. right now on an expiring visa or in a foreign market where they applied for the H-1B but didn't get it. We move them into Canada. We're the sponsoring employer to the Canadian government. We make the commitments to the Canadian government. We house the person in our office. We get them a benefits plan. We take care of them. We feed them lunch every day. We put them in sort of state-of-the-art spaces designed for remote work. Our Calgary office, our flagship office, as an example, has 16 video conference rooms. So you can always have a video call with your home team in San Francisco or New York or elsewhere. And you'll see on the left side of the chart here, the employee gets a ton of benefits. They get to keep their job working for the same company. You saw that both with Juan and Andre. They work in great office spaces. We have a team that settles them, picks them up at the airport, gets them private banking, finds them a home. We get them the immigration support, help them get Canadian citizenship over time. And they have really, really high quality of life. And we pay at the very top end of the Canadian market as a sponsoring employer here. We contract that resource back to our client on an exclusive long-term basis. So think of it kind of as a co-employment model, but we break through the border. And so all of the IP belongs to the client, all of the control goes to the client, the risks and benefits and employment go to the client. And we take care of the ongoing administrative hassle of doing this. We mentioned earlier on that we actually are supported by the Canadian government. We have a unique partnership with them. They actually have funded the company. They've supported us financially to make this work because they believe it's policy aligned in terms of getting knowledge workers into the economy who improve the tax base because they pay high taxes because they make high salaries. And in fact, the Minister of Immigration was in our office to open our Calgary office when we launched the company. The Prime Minister has actually visited here last year. The Deputy Prime Minister, Christopher Freeland, was also here actually last year as well. If you go to the next slide, we're really proud of, this is just a sampling of some of our clients. They're U.S. scale-ups, backed by some of the best VCs in the world. And so just a sampling of some of the folks that we've worked with, just to give you an idea of the types of companies that have called and used our service, and some of the VCs that are behind them. Next slide is something that we have just put together. So we've been hearing from some of our clients that they're going to be entering the CAP, the lottery, but they want to know that in the event they're unsuccessful, because half the applicants are likely to be unsuccessful, and some of them may be coming to the end of their OPT time, or maybe they're a critical resource that's located overseas that you want to have in North America. Can we know in advance that we can quickly get a Canadian work permit? So across all of our clients, we're putting together a portfolio with, if there's 500 people applying for the H-1B cap across our client portfolio, probably 250 people are not going to be successful. So we're going to pre-apply for those 250 work permits so that we can guarantee to you that if on balance across that portfolio, irrespective of if you told us you had 5 or 10, with the portfolio effect of all of those clients, we can pre-apply for those work permits and guarantee that your backup plan is actually already guaranteed. And so we're opening up this service via Envoy to Envoy's relationships and Envoy's clients. And so you'll see there that if this is of interest to you, feel free to hit our website, look around, hit that link, and give us some information, and we'll confirm to you your backup plan. That's really all the information from me, Eric. Happy to pass it back to you and see if we have any questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Irfan and Jim, for going over the material today. Just from my perspective, it's very, very interesting. And Irfan, I know I've told you this previously, but just really interesting on how the Canadian immigration system is just so different from the U.S. and you just continue to see the numbers increasing there. So with that, I just would like to open up the floor to some questions. We've had a couple good questions come in throughout the presentation, but I do want to take a couple minutes to remind our audience that if there are questions, feel free to type those in and we'll try to get to them. But just very, very quickly, just want to remind everyone to, if you're not already, to please subscribe to the Envoy mailing list and follow us on all big social media channels for the latest content updates, policy updates, and webinar invites. And then we have the Sherman HRCI continuing education credits for today's session. These will also be sent out tomorrow, but if you would like to take a moment to copy these down, please feel free to. Okay, so with the questions, and we have about 4 or 5 minutes for questions. So let's hop into the first one here. And then Irfan and Jim, I'll kind of just leave the line open. Whoever wants to tackle it, please feel free to speak up. So what is the difference between open and closed work permit? Are those employer dependent?
Yeah, so I can take on that question. Yes, so the biggest difference between a closed and open work permit is that a closed work permit is employer and location specific, meaning that these work permits are for a specific employer and based upon a specific location. For example, a closed work permit would indicate Mob Squad, for example, as the employer, meaning that this employee can only work for Mob Squad, and it is the location of that of their role is specific as well. For example, they can only work in Toronto or Vancouver, for example. Now, an open work permit is one where the employer and the location is open, meaning that, this individual, the holder of the open work permit, can be employed by anybody and can, work out of any geographical location.
Awesome. Thank you so much for answering that one. This next question we have is, for temporary foreign worker program, is the employee tied to an employer? And the second part of that is, can they, quote, transfer to other employers in Canada, like the H-1B in the United States?
Maybe I'll take that one. It's a sort of similar question. It's a great question. The temporary foreign work permit that we get that are issued at the speed that we get them at are tied to one employer. But we quickly get all of our software engineers to apply, and we process their applications via Envoy to get permanent residency cards. The U.S. equivalent would be a green card. Once that's issued, which for most of our engineers is in about 6 months from when they get to Canada, they're able to go work for anybody. There's no transfer requirements like with the H-1B that you would need to transfer. They're really just, they're a free agent. We can technically not apply for their PRs and make it, the work permit last longer for us to tie them to us. But we just, as a company, we're a benefit corporation. We have a social mission, and we believe in doing the right thing by our staff. And we pay at the very high end of the market here at Mob Squad and have the best benefits plan and, nicer offices. So we haven't had an issue losing staff even when they're able to move. So at the beginning, they're not, but we quickly get them to be free agent status, and have found that doesn't create a retention problem for us.
Great, thank you. Just taking a look here, some other questions. Irfan, I chatted you one. Sorry, just can you take a quick look at that and let me know?
Yeah, so the question is, does Mob Squad only sponsor software engineers? At this time, yes. We really only technical roles. So software engineers, product managers, like people that are involved in developing technical roles, and it's because this global talent stream program really is targeted at certain and certain skill sets, and they really do skew more towards the technical side.
Great, thanks. And so we're at 1:45, but I do have one more question, kind of general for both of you, Irfan and Jim. So we're still obviously in the first month of 2020. What are you guys on the keeping your eyes out open for in terms of the Canadian immigration system, whether it's this year or maybe the first half of this new decade? Like, which our attendees also be on the lookout for?
Maybe Jim, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so most definitely. So kind of to echo what Irfan, you said kind of in the earlier stages of the presentation, we do expect that the immigration numbers to continue to grow. And also one thing that I kind of look forward to is maybe with the new with the new government that's going to be, or the new individuals that are coming into the immigration field, maybe improving the processing times. That's one thing I'm kind of looking forward to.
Great perspective. I agree with both of those things. From my perspective, earlier on in the call, I mentioned that I actually am a senior advisor to the Canadian government. I'm an advisor to the Privy Council office, which runs the government across all of the various pieces of bureaucracy. And so I've been involved in a couple conversations around where all of this is going. And the two things that are on my radar that I think we're going to see over time. One, there is discussion around should we increase the quantum of immigration. So right now, again, 1% of the population, 350,000 people a year. There's some that are suggesting that number should go to 800,000 a year. And so I'm watching that debate and discussion, obviously very supportive of that. I think that's actually a really good economic policy. And so I think sometime here in this, if it's not this year, the first half of this decade, I think we're going to see that number grow. I'm not sure it's going to get to 800,000, but I think over 500,000, 600,000 is certainly in the cards. And so I'm excited about that and the opportunity that creates for all of us. The second thing is actually tied to the question that just came up, which is I think that as this program has been successful, it was a pilot in 2017, it was made permanent in 2019, it continues to get strong interest and very, very good results. I think that we're going to start seeing other categories start to grow and see the opportunity to make this even bigger for other industries, not just for technology talent or software engineers, and see the categories be dozens versus I think 12 or 14 right now.
Gotcha. Very interesting insights. Thank you both for sharing that. And also, just again, a huge thank you to Jim and Irfan for today's presentation. Found it very interesting. I hope all of our attendees did as well. So thank you so much for joining. And to our attendees, thank you so much for joining us today. And as a reminder, you will receive the link to download the recording as well as the slide deck in a follow-up email tomorrow afternoon. So have a great rest of your Thursday and have a great upcoming weekend.
Thanks, Eric.